Gary knelt in the mud, his boots sinking into the rain-soaked earth, and stared at the jungle that refused to stop screaming. This place never shut up. The insects droned like static in his ears. Tree limbs creaked like bones under pressure. Somewhere in the distance, something large dragged its claws through underbrush. Even the wind wasn't a whisper. It was a growl, a pulse that crawled across his skin. But beneath it all, the silence in his own head was louder. He hadn't spoken in days. Not since the fight. Not since he had walked away from the wreckage of the last ambush. The one that hadn't felt like survival, only endurance. The Terran military had a name for men like him now, deserters. He didn't care. He wasn't following orders anymore. Gary stood slowly, his prosthetic arm clicking softly as it adjusted to his balance. The machinery wasn't standard issue anymore. It had been patched, jury-rigged with bits of alien metal and jungle wire. The shell was scraped and pitted, its original chrome sheen long dulled by rust and ash. Still, it worked. That was enough. He moved through the foliage with quiet precision, machete in his real hand, scanning the overgrown ravine below. The last time he'd passed this way, he'd been dragging a broken body behind him. A blue-skinned Amazon, tall and bleeding and barely breathing. Drea. That name hadn't left his mind. Not once. He didn't even know if it was still hers. If the culture that raised her meant what the rumors said, she'd lost the right to it the moment she fell. Still, when he'd found her ceremonial neckband in the mud, split and rusted, he'd whispered the name to himself just once like an old prayer. And now, he found her again. She hadn't moved far from where he'd left her earlier that morning. She sat against a thick tree trunk, one knee drawn up, her head resting back, face half-shadowed by the towering ferns. Her violet eyes were closed, but her fingers still twitched from time to time, restless even in sleep. Gary stood there for a moment, just watching her. The rain had slicked her midnight black hair down her shoulders, catching in the grooves of the ritual scars along her collarbones and back. She had muscle, but not just strength control. Every line of her body was trained, conditioned. She was made for battle. She'd nearly taken his head off in that skirmish before her leg gave out from a shrapnel hit. He'd been faster, but barely. She should have died. Hell, maybe she still would. But something in him had refused to leave her there. He crouched beside her slowly, checking the bandage he'd wrapped days ago. The wound had closed, but infection still lingered around the edges. The jungle was never kind to open flesh. He pulled a ration of clean water from his satchel, soaked a strip of cloth, and began cleaning the gash again. Drea stirred, her head tilted, eyes blinking open. Their gazes met for the first time in days. And just like that, the quiet between them thickened. She didn't speak. She didn't move. But she didn't flinch either, not this time. That was new. Gary offered the canteen. She looked at it like it was a trick. He said nothing, just left it beside her and stepped back. She stared at him for a long moment, then reached for the water with hands that trembled slightly. She drank too fast, coughed once, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand like she hated needing it. Gary turned away, pretending not to notice. He moved to the fire pit and began stoking the embers back to life. The storm had passed, but left behind a thick humidity that clung to everything: skin, gear, thoughts. As flames caught on the dried wood, he pulled out a strip of dried meat and set it on a flat stone beside the fire, closer to her this time. "You need to eat," he said quietly. "It's not poison." Still, she didn't touch it. As night fell, the jungle changed. The familiar whines and screeches gave way to the deeper, guttural howls of nocturnal hunters. The fire snapped sharply, casting brief shadows across Drea's face. Her expression was unreadable, too proud to look afraid, too tired to look strong. Gary sat nearby, repairing his arm-shoulder joint, listening to the crackle of resin and the distant splash of water where something large slipped into the river. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke. "You shouldn't be kind to me." Gary paused mid-turn of the bolt. "Why not?" Her voice was quiet, but the words were shaped like blades. "Because kindness is worse than pain," she said. "It's shame. You defeated me. You should have stripped me of everything. Sold me. Kill me. That's what your kind do, isn't it?" She turned her head, just slightly. The firelight caught the rusted ceremonial band at her neck, a dull relic that had once glowed with power and pride. It looked like it was choking her now. My people, if they knew I sat here, untouched and unfought for, they would call me a ghost. No name, no clan, just property. Her jaw clenched. I lost in battle. That means I lost my right to speak. My name, my past. I am not Drea anymore. Her voice cracked then, but only just. It sounded like something inside her had been holding tight for too long and had finally given way. I'm not even worth chains, she whispered. Even if you don't bind me. I'm already bound. Here. She tapped her temple. And here. Her palm rested against her chest, where her heartbeat thudded visibly through her damp skin. Gary set down his tools and moved a few steps closer. Not to intimidate, not to console, just to be there with her. Is that how they raise you to think? He asked, his voice low and steady. She didn't answer. Her fingers curled around her legs. Gary looked down at his prosthetic arm. Metal, battered, a symbol of survival that never quite felt like salvation. I used to believe in rules too, he said. Ranks, protocol, honor. Then I watched good men die for someone else's lie. And I realized sometimes survival isn't shame. Sometimes it's defiance. She looked at him then, really looked. Not like a prisoner, not like a threat, but like a woman who wasn't sure what she was anymore, and needed someone to see her without telling her what to be. Gary met her gaze without flinching. You bled. You fought. You're still breathing. That's not shame, he said softly. That's strength. No matter what the people who left you behind say. Something flickered in her eyes. Pain, recognition, disbelief. Maybe all three. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She turned away sharply, angry with herself. But Gary didn't move. He didn't offer hollow comfort. He didn't touch her. He just sat there, silent, present. That night, as the fire died to embers, Drea lay down slowly beneath the tattered canopy of their shelter. She didn't ask for the thermal blanket this time, but when he draped it over her, she didn't refuse it either. Her breathing evened out, her muscles, always drawn tight as bowstrings began to ease. And for the first time, she slept not because she was exhausted, but because something in her finally believed she might wake up and not be alone. Dawn came slowly, dragging thick light through the tangled canopy, slanting gold and green across the muddy floor of the jungle. The fire had burned down to a dull ring of embers, pulsing like the remnants of a dying star. Gary sat on a fallen tree just beyond the shelter, sharpening a piece of metal into the rough beginnings of a spearhead. He wasn't sure why he was doing it. Maybe to keep his hands busy. Maybe because the silence between them was no longer oppressive. It was delicate now, like glass that hadn't yet decided whether to shatter or hold. Behind him, he heard Drea stir. The sound was small, just the shifting of weight on damp leaves, the exhale of someone who hadn't slept that deeply in days. He didn't turn. He just listened. There was a moment where nothing moved. Then came the soft crunch of footsteps. She stood at the edge of the fire pit, her posture wary but upright, stronger than she'd looked the day before. Her hair, though still damp and matted from the storm, had been pulled into a tighter braid, her fingers having worked through the knots while he wasn't watching. She looked down at the remnants of the fire. Her eyes flicked to the untouched meat beside it. She picked it up. Gary forced himself not to react, not even a glance. Drea brought the dried meat to her mouth and bit off a small piece. She chewed slowly, mechanically. Her throat moved with effort as she swallowed, as if her body didn't quite trust the gesture. He heard it clearly when she muttered, barely above a whisper, "Warm would have been better." Gary raised an eyebrow, but didn't look back. "Didn't think you were planning on eating it." She didn't respond right away. "Then I wasn't." He allowed himself the briefest twitch of a smile. It was gone before she could see it. Drea sat across from him, keeping the fire between them. She didn't ask if she was allowed. That, he realized, was the first unspoken shift. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds coming from the distant calls of birds and the occasional snapping twig in the underbrush. Gary focused on his work, carving notches into the shaft of a spear. Drea watched. Finally, she said, "Your arm." It's Terran military issue, but modified. You're not with them anymore. It wasn't a question. No, he said simply. You left. Something like that. She nodded just once. Her gaze drifted to the edge of the clearing, where the jungle thickened into a wall of green shadows and hanging vines. Her voice, when it came again, was low and steady. They teach us that Terrans are weak. Untrained. Soft. You didn't fight like someone weak. Gary didn't look up. And you didn't fall like someone soft. That earned him a glance. Brief, but unmistakable. She seemed almost surprised. Then her expression closed again, unreadable. Why did you keep me alive? She asked. He set the spearhead down and finally looked at her. I don't know. It was the truth. He expected her to push, to call it a lie. But instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him as if trying to see beneath his skin. My people would think you're mad. You gain nothing. No coin. No glory. Not even obedience. Gary shrugged. What I want, none of those things can buy. Drea's lips parted as if to say something, then closed again. Her hands were clenched in her lap, the meat long forgotten. He noticed the way her fingers curled, the slight tremor there. Not from weakness, from restraint. I used to believe strength meant control, she said. Dominance. Power in combat. Now I sit here, and I'm not sure what anything means anymore. Gary's voice was quiet. Sometimes survival asks us to rewrite the rules. She looked at him sharply. And who writes yours? I do now. That silenced her. The wind picked up through the trees, stirring leaves like whispers overhead. Drea sat back slightly, eyes scanning the treetops. Her posture shifted subtly but enough. Gary recognized the instinct. You heard something? He said. She nodded. A sound. 2 clicks. Bird call, but wrong rhythm. Could be a scout. Slaver? Possibly. Maybe bounty hunter. Gary rose, grabbing his rifle and checking the ammo count. 2 shots left. Maybe 3 if he let the chamber overheat. He tossed Drea a blade. Nothing ceremonial, just a short, rusted machete he'd sharpened earlier. She caught it, fingers wrapping around the hilt like it belonged there. The moment she touched it, something in her face changed. It was subtle, barely more than a breath, but it was there. Not submission, not gratitude, purpose. They moved quickly but quietly, slipping through the foliage like ghosts. Drea moved with practiced fluidity, still favoring her injured leg slightly. But her steps were precise, her awareness sharp. They circled the clearing. Nothing. Then, near the riverbank, they saw it. A broken drone, Terran tech, rigged with low-range sensors and a recording lens. Crushed by something large. Blood on the grass nearby, though not fresh. Drea crouched beside it, her fingers brushing over the remains. Whoever sent this isn't far, she murmured. And they're hunting us. Gary asked. Her eyes met his. You dragged me off a battlefield. That makes you a thief. To them, I'm stolen property. He exhaled slowly. Then they'll come. She nodded. They always do. Back at the camp, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange through the canopy, Drea took it upon herself to help rebuild the fire. Gary didn't ask. He just watched. When she finished, she sat beside him. Not across, not behind the flame. Beside. Tomorrow, she said quietly, we need to move. The heat signature here's been building for too long. The longer we stay, the louder we become. Gary nodded. Agreed. A long pause stretched between them, filled only by the fire and the hush of approaching night. Then Drea spoke, her voice barely audible. You gave me shelter, food, words I didn't expect, but you never asked for anything in return. I didn't want anything. She turned her head slowly toward him. Her eyes no longer carried suspicion. Just wait. Everyone wants something. Gary looked into the flames. Maybe I just wanted you to feel like a person again. That silenced her more deeply than any argument. That night, they didn't speak again. But when sleep came, Drea lay not on the far edge of the shelter, but a little closer. Not touching, not yet, but near enough to hear his breathing, near enough to feel the fire. And for the first time, not feel afraid of either. The jungle was on fire. Not in the real world, but in Gary's mind, it burned. He stood on cracked ground littered with spent casings, the air thick with smoke and the reek of scorched flesh. The sky above was molten orange, flickering with gunships and falling debris. His boots crunched over broken armor, some Terran, some alien, all lifeless. And then there was movement ahead. Fast. Blue. He raised his weapon. Drea came out of the smoke like a ghost of war, her body armored in ritual bone plate, her braids wet with blood, eyes burning with fury and something else. Something too human. She rushed him with an alien blade. He dodged, barely, and countered. He didn't mean to hit her. He didn't mean to throw the blade that caught her in the side. But he did. In the dream, he did it again. Again. Every time, he hesitated and still hurt her. She fell to her knees, clutching her wound, but never looked away. Her lips moved, but no words came. Her eyes screamed. "Why did you stop saving people?" they seemed to ask. Gary opened his mouth, but the world swallowed him whole. He woke with a gasp. The air was humid and heavy. A bead of sweat rolled down his neck. The fire had died down to a dull glow, and a thin layer of mist clung to the jungle floor. Gary sat up slowly, breathing hard. The dream clung to him like oil, thick and dark. Beside him, Drea was already awake. She sat with her knees drawn to her chest, watching the dying embers in silence. Her face was unreadable in the half-light, but her eyes, sharp, violet, unblinking, were fixed on him. She'd heard him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between them had changed again. He stood and moved to the water basin he'd carved into a rock shelf. Splashing the cool water on his face didn't erase the dream, but it gave him something real to feel. Something alive. We turned back. Drea hadn't moved. But her gaze followed him now, not like prey tracking a predator, but like a hunter watching another wounded animal. "You talk in your sleep?" she said quietly. Gary dried his face with the inside of his shirt. "Didn't think I talked much at all. It wasn't words." She paused, but it was pain. He said nothing. Drea shifted her gaze back to the embers. "You were dreaming of the day you captured me." It wasn't a question, but he still nodded. "I remember it too," she said. "The pain in my leg, the heat, the noise, and you, standing over me, blood on your hands. I thought you were going to end me." He met her eyes, voice flat. "I thought I was going to." Her expression didn't change. "Why didn't you?" He sat down again, this time not across from her, but beside her. Not close, but not far. Gary stared into the coals for a long moment before answering. "I've killed people who deserved it. I've killed people who didn't. That day, I saw your face. Not your armor, not your scars, not your height or species. Just your face. And you didn't look afraid. You looked tired. Tired and angry. And proud." He paused. "I didn't want to be the one who broke that." Drea's voice dropped to a whisper. "So you spared me." "I spared myself," he said. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you regret it?" Gary didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he said, "I regret the things I did to make me the kind of man who had to ask that question." That silenced her. A breeze passed through the camp, rustling the leaves like whispers of ghosts. Morning hadn't fully arrived yet, but the dark was no longer complete. The light that broke through the canopy was weak, filtered, hesitant. Drea stood and began inspecting the perimeter of their camp. It was a ritual now, checking traps, resetting wires, sharpening sticks coated with paralytic resin from the blackleaf trees. She moved slower than before, favoring her injured leg, but her motions were precise. Gary followed her with his eyes, watching the way she scanned for tracks. She was no longer just surviving. She was reclaiming control. She knelt suddenly and touched a patch of dirt near the edge of the clearing. "What is it?" he asked, moving toward her. She held up 2 fingers. Footprints. One set. Heavy. Human, most likely. Not yours. Gary crouched beside her. The impression was faint but fresh. The toes were spread wide, the heel deep. The person had been carrying weight or crouching low to stalk. He rose quickly, scanning the tree line. "We're being tracked." Drea stood as well, her voice steady. "Not surprising. They want me back, or want to punish you for taking me." Gary's jaw clenched. "We need to move." "Tonight," she agreed. In daylight, we'll leave a trail. But we can break camp when the shadows stretch long. I know a place, rocky, water nearby. No roots to leave footprints in. Gary nodded. She was already thinking like a partner. But as she turned to reset one of the snares, she spoke without looking at him. You didn't kill me, but you still wounded me. He froze. She straightened, wiping mud from her fingers on her thigh. Her tone was matter of fact. Not bitter, not cruel. I've killed many. Some begged. Some didn't. But I never forgot the ones who hesitated. Gary exhaled slowly. I didn't mean to hit your leg. I meant to disarm you. I hesitated. She finally looked at him. That hesitation saved your life. If you'd struck true, I would have fought until my last breath. But you stopped short, and so did I. She stepped closer then, and he didn't move. Her eyes narrowed. Not in aggression, but curiosity. You confuse me, Gary. You act like a soldier, but you carry yourself like an exile. I'm both. You give me food, but never orders. You're not mine to command. You look at me like I'm a person. You are. A beat passed between them. Tense, quiet, electric. Then she turned away and said, Pack light. Leave nothing that can be traced. Gary watched her move through the trees, her figure blending into the early mist. He touched the side of his prosthetic arm, running his fingers over the scarring near the shoulder. He didn't remember who gave him the wound, but he remembered the moment he stopped caring who he gave them to. Until now, he stood, taking a last look at the fading embers, then started gathering their things. Not because he feared pursuit, not because he followed orders, but because for the first time in a long time, he was fighting for something that didn't come with rank, orders, or bloodstain medals. He was fighting for something simple. A second chance. They moved under cover of twilight, silent figures weaving through roots and shadows, guided more by instinct than sight. The jungle had begun to thin in places, less dense here, with rock outcrops rising like sleeping beasts from the moss-covered ground. Drea led the way with quiet confidence, even favoring her injured leg. Her awareness was razor-sharp. Every broken twig, every shifted stone pulled her attention like a sixth sense. Gary followed a few steps behind, his rifle slung tight across his back, boots rolling heel to toe in practiced silence. They were a unit now, not quite partners. Not yet, but no longer captor and captive. By the time they reached the ridge she had spoken of, a weather-worn bluff above a stream bed, night had swallowed the sky whole. Stars blinked above the canopy like cautious witnesses. They made camp in a narrow stone hollow, half sheltered from the wind by an overhang of jagged basalt. Drea lit the fire this time. She didn't ask for help. Her fingers moved confidently, setting the kindling, striking the flint stone Gary had shown her how to use 2 nights ago. The first spark leapt, then caught. Gary watched the flames grow, his eyes reflecting the flicker. For the first time, Drea's face didn't look like it had been carved from stone. She was tired. She was hungry, but she looked present. Water's clean, he said, returning from the stream and setting the filled canteen down beside her. Thank you, she said without hesitation. A moment passed before Gary sat opposite her, his back against the rock wall, arms resting on his knees. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable now, but thoughtful. Drea was the first to break it. Back home, in my culture, a captured warrior is no longer a warrior. Her voice was steady, but low. Gary didn't speak. He let her continue. We're raised from birth with one truth: strength defines worth. Not just muscle, will, honor, dominance in battle. And if you fall, if you're taken, you become what we call Sarin. She looked into the fire, not at him. It means broken chain, a title of shame, worse than death. You're no longer fit to carry a sword. You're not even worthy of polishing one. To them, I'm not a warrior anymore. I'm a slave. Gary listened, absorbing every word. They won't come looking for me, she said after a moment. Not because they think I'm dead, but because to them, I might as well be. He felt the weight of it like a slow stone rolling through his chest. Drea looked up then, meeting his gaze. So whatever I was before, war commander, tactician, duelist, that's gone. Now I'm nothing. Her voice didn't tremble, but it carried the sharp, still echo of something cut too deep to bleed. Gary leaned forward, elbows on knees. No, he said, quiet but firm. You're not nothing. Not to me. She stared at him, and for a moment, the firelight seemed to flicker slower, quieter. Why? She asked. Not hostile, not sarcastic, just curious. Gary let the silence hang, then said, because you're still here, still fighting, still choosing who to be. I've seen soldiers fall apart for less. I've seen men throw away their souls because they couldn't handle losing a title. He paused, then added, and I've seen warriors die with pride but no peace. I'll take the survivor every time. Drea's eyes narrowed, unreadable. Is that what you are? A survivor? Gary exhaled a long, slow breath. Some days. Others, I feel like a ghost in someone else's skin. She didn't push, but something in her posture eased just a little. Her shoulders dropped. The tension in her jaw softened. Then she asked, why are you here, Gary? On this planet. You weren't born here. You don't belong to this war. His eyes dropped to the flames. I came with the Terran Expeditionary Force. 5 years ago, back when we still thought we were helping. Drea tilted her head. Helping who? That's the thing, he said, rubbing his forehead. We didn't know. Just orders. Secure territory. Build rapport. Create alliances. And then one mission changed all of it. His voice quieted. We were told to contain resistance in a border village. They said it was a hotbed of enemy scouts. We went in with full armor, full ordnance. He swallowed hard. There were no scouts. Just families. Traitors. Kids. Drea didn't interrupt. She listened. Gary's fingers curled unconsciously against the stone at his side. I tried to call it off. Told command it was a mistake. They didn't listen. They told us to execute protocol. Clean sweep. He looked up again, his eyes hard with the memory. I walked away, left my post, dragged one of the injured villagers into the jungle. Carried her for 2 days. She died on the 3rd. Drea was quiet, but her expression had changed, subtle, but real. You broke their code, she said. Yeah, he replied, but I couldn't live with mine anymore. The fire popped, sending a small spray of sparks into the air. Drea leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, mimicking his posture now. Then you understand, she said softly. He looked at her. What's like to lose your people? Not because you died, but because you chose something they won't forgive. Gary nodded. Yeah, I understand. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something silent passed between them. A flicker of shared ruin. The knowledge that neither of them had a home anymore. That both had survived something that didn't end when the violence stopped. The firelight painted soft gold across the ridges and valleys of her blue skin. For the first time, Gary noticed the pattern of her scars. Not just random cuts, but deliberate lines like a map of identity carved in flesh. Some were faded, others newer. He pointed gently. These, they mean something, don't they? She looked down at her shoulder, brushing her fingers along a curved line. This one is from my first duel. I won with one, eye nearly swollen shut. She traced another near her ribs. This is from the rite of the breathless fall. A ritual where we leap into a river canyon blindfolded, trusting the current to carry us. Gary blinked. That sounds reckless. It is. A small smile tugged at her lips. But it teaches you something about surrendering to what you can't control. He tilted his head. Seems like your people don't surrender anything lightly. No, she said. We don't. A beat of silence. Then she said, quieter now, you should know. I've never sat this close to a man before. Not unbound. Not unafraid. Gary didn't move. You want space, I'll give it. I don't, she said. Another pause. I just don't know what to do with this feeling. Of being seen. Not judged. Not assessed for weakness. Just seen. Gary looked at her, voice soft. I think we both forgot how that feels. She met his gaze. And this time, she didn't look away. He reached forward, not quickly. Not assuming. Just offering. His hand brushed hers lightly where it rested on her knee. She didn't flinch. In fact, her fingers shifted, closed gently around his. It wasn't passion. Not yet. It wasn't ownership. It wasn't a promise. But it was the beginning of something. Something new. Something chosen. And when Drea laid down that night beside him, she didn't curl in on herself. She didn't face away. She lay on her side, facing the fire, Gary's warmth just inches behind her. Neither reached further, but neither pulled back. And for the first time, they didn't sleep out of sheer exhaustion. They slept because something inside them had quieted. Because here, in the hush of the wild, they'd found something they hadn't known they were looking for, a reason to rest. A reason to stay. The storm came fast and without apology. Gary had smelled it first, ozone and wet rot, and by the time he and Drea found shelter, the sky had already opened up. Rain came down in heavy sheets, drumming against the jungle with such force it sounded like war. Not that he was a stranger to war, but this was a different kind of violence. Not human, not personal, just the world reminding them that they were small. They slipped through a narrow ravine, feet sliding over wet stone and tangled roots. Drea led them to a narrow crevice she'd remembered from a scouting mission long ago. It was barely wide enough to squeeze through, but it opened into a shallow cave, dry and warm enough to be a miracle. They collapsed inside, soaked and breathless. For a long moment, neither spoke. Just the sound of the storm outside, the rising heat of their bodies in the cold stone air, and the breath between them. Gary peeled off his damp jacket, shaking out water. Drea sat across from him, steam lifting from her skin. Rain had plastered her braids to her neck and shoulders, and her scars caught the faint green glow of moss light clinging to the ceiling. She didn't look fierce now. She looked tired. Real. I thought storms on your world were just rain, she muttered. Gary huffed a short laugh. This isn't my world. She gave him a look. Could have fooled me. He leaned back against the rock wall, watching her as she twisted her hair to wring out the water. Her leg was still bothering her. He could tell, even if she hid it well. You should rest that leg, he said. It's fine. He raised an eyebrow. You're limping more. I said it's fine. Her voice was sharp, defensive. Gary didn't push. He just looked at her, quiet. After a moment, her shoulders softened. She sighed and looked away. I've walked through worse. I know, he said gently. That's not the point. Silence again. The cave held them like a question neither wanted to ask. Then, slowly, Drea spoke. Her voice was lower now, calmer, but edged with something older, something frayed. I used to believe that death was preferable to defeat. Gary didn't interrupt. I thought that if I was ever captured, I'd kill myself before they could strip me of who I was. Her gaze dropped to the band on her wrist, the faint symbol barely visible now. We're taught that honor only lives if you die with it. That survival after failure is worse than dishonor. It's erasure. Her hands clenched. But I didn't die. I didn't even try. Gary waited, not to fill the silence, but to hold space for it. I kept waiting for you to act like the others, she said. To chain me, use me, sell me. You didn't. I won't, he said. She looked at him sharply. Why? His answer came slow, honest. Because I've seen what war does to people. And I've seen what mercy does, too. I choose the second one, even if it's harder. She studied him for a long moment, eyes narrowed like she was still unsure whether to believe him. And then her voice shifted. I used to think pain was something to be conquered. That fear was something to bury so deep it became stone. But lately, she trailed off. Gary leaned forward slightly. What? Drea took a breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she set them on her knees. Lately, I feel things I was never trained to feel. Confusion, longing, trust. They are louder now, and I don't know what to do with them. Gary said nothing, but his chest tightened. Outside, thunder cracked again. Rain hammered the stones like memory. Earlier, she said, voice soft, when you touched me, I didn't pull away. I noticed. Do you know why? He met her eyes. Tell me. She swallowed. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like a prisoner. I just felt like a woman. The words struck him deep. Not because they were unexpected, but because of how hard they must have been to say. He moved, slowly, sitting closer. She didn't shift away. Instead, her body leaned into the warmth he brought. Do you know how long it's been since I let anyone close enough to see me like this? She asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't, but he could guess. Drea's voice cracked slightly. Everything in me says this is dangerous, that it's wrong, that I'm already lost. And yet, I don't want to leave this cave. You're not lost, Gary said. You're finding yourself in a way your people never gave you the chance to. I don't know who I am without the war, she admitted. Then we figure out together. Her gaze flicked to his. You'd stay? Even now? Yes. The word was simple, unshakable. She exhaled shakily and then, for the first time, reached out to touch his face. Her fingers were cold, calloused but gentle. They brushed his cheek, then settled there, cupping him as if trying to memorize the warmth of him. I've been touched in battle, in pain, but never like this. He closed his hand around hers. You deserve more than what the war gave you. She leaned in slowly. This time, he met her halfway. Their foreheads touched, not out of hesitation, but intention. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was intimacy, real, grounded, human. Her breath was warm against his skin. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. And still they stayed like that. The storm raged outside, indifferent to their silence. But the war inside them had paused, finally. Not for long, but enough. They would kiss. Soon. But first, they just sat in the quiet together, forehead to forehead, hands entwined, breath steady. Not because they needed to escape, but because for the first time in either of their lives, they had found something worth staying for. And that was stronger than anything they'd ever been trained to fight for. The jungle had changed. Not how it looked, but how it listened. Every sound now felt closer, sharper, as if the trees were leaning in, waiting for something. Drea and Gary had traveled in near silence for days, side by side, but wrapped in thought. They didn't speak about the moment in the cave. The near kiss, the tremble in their voices, the way their breath had synced in that tiny space like a shared secret. Some things didn't need to be spoken yet. They just needed time to become real. It was Drea who noticed the tracks first, just beyond the ridge. Shallow boot prints. Human. Two sets, moving fast, one dragging slightly. She crouched. They're close. Gary nodded, eyes scanning the brush. Too close. They hadn't been followed by chance. Someone had gone looking for them. Someone who knew exactly who they were. They moved quickly after that, navigating the high rock paths until they reached a clearing, once a military outpost, now long abandoned. Broken towers leaned like snapped bones. The remains of old war crates and rusted antennas jutted out from the ground. As they crossed into the center, Gary stopped short. His eyes landed on a set of drag marks across the dirt. Recent, heavy, and then a voice behind them. Well, I'll be damned. Gary turned slowly, already knowing the voice. Tavin stepped from behind a rusted beam, flanked by another armed merc. His Terran armor was old and cracked, like the man inside it. But his smile was sharp. I didn't think it'd be this easy, Tavin said, rifle loosely held. One deserter, one lost Amazon, both worth a decent payday. Gary's hand hovered over his sidearm, but he didn't draw. Not yet. You've been tracking us. Tavin grinned. There's a bounty out for both of you. Your pretty friend here? Turns out the elite want her gone quietly. She's bad press. A war commander who didn't die with her blade? That's scandal. Drea tensed beside Gary, jaw locked. And you? Tavin added. Terran Command hasn't forgotten you either, Draven. There's still blood on that file you try to bury. Turns out walking away from a massacre doesn't sit well with the people who signed off on it. Drea took a step forward. So you're just here to collect. Like we're meat. Tavin shrugged. Call it what you want. You two aren't ghosts anymore. You're headlines. Before Gary could reply, Drea moved. In a single breath, she'd closed the distance, her blade out. Tavin tried to raise his weapon, but she struck low, driving him back. He stumbled, weapon clattering to the ground. Gary stepped into position, leveling his rifle at the second merc. Don't! The man hesitated, then dropped his weapon. The jungle held its breath. Drea pinned Tavin down with her boot, blade at his throat. Her voice was low, shaking, but not from fear. You came here to make me a slave again, she said, to chain me with the lies of my past. Tavin coughed. I came for a paycheck. You came for a reckoning. Her blade trembled. Gary stepped beside her, voice calm. You don't have to do this. She didn't look at him, but she listened. Then, slowly, she lowered the blade. I'm not what they think I am anymore, she whispered. I'm not what I used to be. Tavin stared up at her. You're not going to kill me? No, she said, stepping back. But you're not going to forget this either. Gary motioned with his gun. Go, before I change my mind. The mercs disappeared into the trees. When the jungle quieted again, it was deeper than before, as if the forest itself understood something sacred had passed. They didn't speak for a while. Later, back at camp, just a small clearing tucked under the stone edge of the ridge, they sat by the fire. Drea cleaned her blade in silence. Gary sat across from her, elbows on knees, watching the flames. She finally spoke. When I was a child, they told us death was the only way to end a fall from honor. That survival was for cowards. But today I lived, and I let them live too. Gary nodded. That wasn't cowardice. That was strength. She looked up. I don't know who I am without someone telling me what I'm supposed to be. Gary leaned forward. Then you get to decide now. No orders. No blood price. Just choice. She looked at him, really looked. The flickering firelight painted warmth over his tired face, the shadows softening the edge of the scar beneath his jaw. I don't want to be alone in this, she said. You're not. Her hand found his. And then, slowly, carefully, she leaned in. This time, he didn't hesitate. Their lips met in the middle, tentative at first, then deeper. A kiss not born of lust, but of quiet, hard-won trust. Her hand cupped his cheek. His fingers curled at the back of her neck. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't practiced, but it was real. When they pulled apart, she didn't look away. Neither did he. We don't have a future yet, she whispered. No, he said, but we have a direction. And that, for now, was enough. They'd reached the plateau by dawn. The climb had taken hours, but neither of them complained. Every step had been deliberate. Upward, forward, away. The jungle still sprawled beneath them like a living thing, green and endless, but up here the air was lighter, thinner, cleaner, the kind of air that made you feel like something was ending and something else had already begun. Gary crouched near a slab of half-buried metal, brushing away a layer of damp moss and dirt. Beneath it was what he'd been hoping to find, the rusted skeleton of a Terran transceiver, long dead, but not beyond resurrection. Drea stood nearby, watching the treeling. The sky had turned from indigo to deep gold. You sure this will work? She asked without turning. Gary didn't answer right away. He pulled a strip power cell from the pouch on his belt and slid it into the beacon's cracked casing. The light blinked once. Then again, faint but alive. I boosted the range last week, he said finally. Pulled parts from the old targeting array. Rig it to broadcast on a civilian relay net. You've been preparing this, she said. He nodded. Didn't know if I'd ever use it. Didn't know if I'd make it this far. And now, he looked up at her. The rising sun painted her blue skin in hues of amber and rose. Her braids fluttered in the breeze, the wind playing across her shoulders like a breath. Now I want to use it. She stepped closer. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You told me once you had a contact. A smuggler, Gary confirmed. Owes me a favor. Helped him out of a tight spot years ago. Refused to turn him in. He swore if I ever needed to disappear, he'd answer the call. And he'll just show up? No questions asked. Gary smiled faintly. That's the only kind of question he doesn't ask. He pressed the transmitter button. A soft blue pulse expanded in the air, invisible to the eye, but humming beneath the skin. The beacon let out a low chirp, twice, then went still. It's done, he said. Now we wait. Drea sat down beside him, her posture tense. Not out of fear, something deeper. Something more like disbelief. You're really leaving Amazonas. He looked out at the horizon. I'm not leaving it behind. I'm just not letting it hold me anymore. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, I never imagined leaving this place. Not alive. Gary turned toward her. Do you want to? The question lingered like smoke. She didn't answer. Not right away. Her eyes tracked the sky, the clouds shifting in slow currents above the ridge. The wind picked up. A bird called in the distance, sharp, high, and free. When I lost my command, she said, voice low, I told myself I was already dead. My people don't mourn the fallen. They erase them. I was trained to believe that living after defeat was worse than dying in glory. Gary didn't interrupt. But I didn't die, she continued. I was captured. And instead of torture, I found silence. Instead of shame, I found kindness. She turned to face him. And now, I found something even more dangerous. He met her eyes. What's that? Hope. It was a simple word, but it struck him like a blade. I don't know where we're going, she said. I don't know who I'll be without the war. But I want to find out. Then come with me, Gary said. No uniforms. No codes. Just you. Just me. She hesitated, then nodded. Once. Yes. He reached out and took her hand, quietly, naturally, without ceremony. Her fingers curled into his, strong and certain. A soft whir split the air. They both turned toward the sky. A shadow was moving across the clouds. A long, narrow vessel descending from high orbit. Not a military carrier. No markings. Civilian. Scarred by re-entry and weather, but fast. And silent. Drea stood. That's your contact? Gary grinned. That's our way out. The ship hovered over the plateau, wind stirring the grass. A long ramp hissed open at the belly, unfolding like a tongue of steel. Neither of them moved. Then Drea said, Are you sure you want to bring me into your world? Gary stepped beside her. I don't have a world anymore, but maybe we can make one. She looked at the ramp, then at the jungle behind them, and finally at him. You still carry your weapon. Gary glanced at the rifle slung across his shoulder. Slowly, he unclipped it. I don't need it where we're going. He dropped it into the dirt. She smiled, genuine, soft, a little stunned by her own peace. And then she reached up, cupped his face with both hands, and kissed him. This time it wasn't gentle. It was real, earned. The kind of kiss you give when you've fought for the right to feel something other than fear. The kind of kiss that says, we survived and now we get to live. When she pulled back, she was smiling. So, she said, her voice rough with emotion, what do people like us do with a second chance? Gary's fingers laced through hers. We don't waste it. And together, they walked up the ramp, side by side, not looking back. The ship sealed behind them with a soft thud. Its engines flared, lifting them off the blood-soaked soil of a planet that had tried and failed to define them. They weren't fugitives. They weren't broken. They were something new. And somewhere out there, beyond the ashes and shame, beyond the wreckage and ruins, something was waiting for them. Something they hadn't dared believe they could still have. A future. Together. The sea looked different on this world. It wasn't the violent, foam-choked kind Gary had seen during jungle storms. This one was calm. Wide. It moved like it had all the time in the universe. Like it knew how to rest. The sun had just begun to rise, casting ribbons of orange and silver across the surface of the water. A breeze rolled in from the waves, soft and cool, and it carried the scent of salt and something sweet, like fruit or wild flowers he couldn't name. Gary sat on the edge of the stone ledge overlooking the cove, his legs stretched out, boots off, bare feet in the sand. The new planet, Asteris, was small, unimportant by galactic standards. No battles had ever been fought here. No maps showed it in red. That was why he chose it. It was a place no one would look for a runaway, or for two people trying to begin again. He heard her approach before she spoke. Her bare footsteps padded across the wooden steps behind him. The robe she wore swayed lightly in the breeze. Drea didn't speak at first. She just walked up behind him, slid her arms around his chest from behind, and rested her chin on his shoulder. You always wake up before me, she murmured. Gary smiled. Force of habit. You don't have to anymore. I know. She held him for a moment longer, then stepped around and sat beside him. Her hair was down. No braids, no cords, no bones. Just wind-tossed black silk over her shoulders, kissed by sun and sea air. She looked younger here. Softer, but still strong. Always strong. He reached for her hand and laced his fingers with hers. For a while, they just sat in silence, watching the waves. Then Drea spoke, eyes still on the horizon. I dreamed last night. Bad. No, she paused. Good. I was standing in a hall of mirrors, like the ceremonial trial chamber. But every reflection was different. One was the girl I used to be. Proud. Cold. Untouchable. One was the soldier they tried to make me. One was what they called me when I fell. Gary turned to her, listening, and then she continued. There was one I didn't recognize. She was smiling. Her hair was loose. She was barefoot. I think she was me. Gary brushed a wind-blown strand of hair from her face. You are her, he said. Drea looked at him for a long moment. Her violet eyes searched his, quiet and bright. I don't feel broken anymore, she whispered. You never were, he replied. And then, without waiting, she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't hungry. It wasn't desperate. It was peace. She kissed him like he was the shore she'd been swimming toward her whole life. When they parted, she pressed her forehead to his. I love you, she whispered. Gary's chest tightened, not from surprise, but from how deeply he needed to hear it. He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. I love you too. She smiled, small and real. Her whole body softened in his arms. They stayed like that for a long time, just two souls who had finally stopped running. The wind moved gently around them, carrying no warnings. No orders, just the sound of the sea, the birds, and their breathing. Later, they would return to the house, cook breakfast, maybe plant more of the fruit trees Gary had brought from the market. Maybe not. They had time now. They had each other. And for once, nothing and no one would take that away.